There's something undeniably thrilling about a secret, especially one so valuable it could change the course of history. Picture this: a lone courier, disguised as a humble merchant or a wandering monk, carrying a message that could topple a kingdom or spark a war. Their mission: to slip past enemy lines unseen and unsuspected, with nothing but their wits and a carefully crafted disguise to protect them. This wasn't just espionage, it was an art form, a high-stakes game of deception where the smallest mistake could mean capture or worse. And yet, against all odds, these couriers succeeded, using some of the most ingenious tricks ever devised. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 23 of their most daring disguises, each one a masterpiece of medieval cunning. Think about the pressure these messengers faced. A single intercepted letter could reveal battle plans, betray alliances, or expose a monarch's most vulnerable secrets. The stakes couldn't have been higher, but the couriers of the Middle Ages didn't just rely on luck, they engineered their own. Hidden compartments sewn into clothing, messages written in invisible ink, even entire identities fabricated down to the smallest detail. Some posed as pilgrims, their sacred scrolls hollowed out to hide coded missives. Others transformed into minstrels, using musical instruments as clever hiding spots. The creativity was boundless and the risks even greater. What makes these stories so captivating isn't just the cleverness of the methods, it's the human drama behind them. These couriers weren't faceless agents, they were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, relying on quick thinking and sheer audacity to outsmart their enemies. Their disguises weren't just costumes, they were lifelines. And as we delve into each one, you'll start to see how these tactics didn't just shape individual missions, they influenced the fate of nations. From the bustling markets of Florence to the shadowy corridors of royal courts, these couriers moved like ghosts, their secrets safe until the moment they reached their destination. Ready to uncover their secrets, let's begin. In the tangled web of medieval politics, couriers weren't just messengers, they were the invisible threads holding kingdoms together. Imagine the weight on their shoulders. A single parchment could promise peace or declare war, and its safe delivery rested entirely on their ability to blend in, to vanish into the crowd. These men and women operated in a world without satellites or encrypted radios, where survival depended on sharp instincts and flawless disguises. While modern spies might rely on gadgets, medieval couriers had something even more powerful: the art of becoming someone else entirely. Their work was far more dangerous than simply riding from one castle to another. Every road held potential threats: bandits, rival lords, or enemy scouts, all eager to intercept valuable information. A courier caught carrying sensitive documents faced imprisonment, torture, or worse. That's why the most successful ones mastered the delicate balance of appearing utterly unremarkable while hiding secrets in plain sight. A merchant's ledger might contain coded troop movements. A pilgrim's prayer book could conceal a hollowed-out compartment for secret treaties. Even the humblest tradesman, a blacksmith, a baker might be a courier in disguise, using their everyday role as the perfect cover. What's fascinating is how these methods varied by region and circumstance. In the bustling cities of Italy, couriers might pose as silk traders, their luxurious fabrics hiding folded letters between layers of cloth. In the remote countryside, they'd adopt the guise of shepherds, their flocks offering a reason to move unchallenged across borders, and in times of war. Some of the boldest disguised themselves as enemy soldiers, slipping through checkpoints with forged insignias and carefully rehearsed backstories. The sheer diversity of their tactics reveals just how adaptable and how vital they were to the medieval world's delicate balance of power. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about these couriers wasn't just their cleverness, it was their courage. They knew the risks, yet they chose to walk into danger anyway, armed with nothing but their disguises and their wits. Every successful delivery was a small miracle, a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. And as we explore the specific disguises they used, you'll start to see how these unsung heroes didn't just deliver messages, they shaped history itself. The merchant disguise was a masterpiece of simplicity, because who would suspect a trader of olive oil or wool of carrying royal secrets? These couriers didn't just look the part, they lived it. They memorized market prices, haggled over goods, and even adopted regional accents to sell their cover stories. But beneath the mundane exterior lay a carefully constructed deception. Take the humble merchant's wagon, for example. While it might appear loaded with sacks of grain or barrels of wine, clever modifications turned it into a mobile vault. Some had hollow axles, their interiors just wide enough to hold a rolled parchment. Others featured false compartments beneath the driver's seat, accessible only by removing a hidden pin or sliding a panel in a precise sequence. Even the merchandise itself became part of the ruse. A crate of ceramics might contain a single false bottomed pot, its cavity housing a folded letter sealed with wax. Bundles of fabric could conceal messages stitched between layers, the threads dyed to match so perfectly that only someone knowing exactly where to look would spot the tampering. And then there were the cloaks, thick, woolen garments with linings slit open and resewn to create pockets invisible to casual inspection. A courier might wear such a cloak for weeks, the fabric absorbing sweat and dust until it smelled and looked as worn as any traveler's, rendering it utterly unremarkable. What made this disguise so brilliant was its double layer of protection. Even if guards grew suspicious, searching a merchant's wagon was a time-consuming task. Unpacking dozens of barrels or unwrapping bolts of cloth risked damaging valuable goods, something few soldiers wanted to explain to their superiors. And since merchants frequently carried letters of safe passage from local lords, demanding overly aggressive searches could spark diplomatic incidents. The couriers exploited this perfectly, letting the sheer inconvenience of their cargo become their shield. Some even went a step further, bribing actual merchants to let them travel as part of larger caravans, disappearing into the noise and chaos of a dozen similar wagons. But perhaps the most daring twist, some couriers didn't just pose as merchants, they became them. They'd establish real trade routes, building credible reputations over months or years. By the time they carried their first secret message, they had a documented history of crossing borders, complete with receipts, known associates, and even legitimate business rivals. This long-game approach turned their cover into something no spy could fabricate overnight, a life. And when the moment came to transport something vital, their years of mundane activity made them virtually invisible. After all, why would anyone scrutinize the salt seller who'd been making the same trip every season for a decade? The greatest trick wasn't hiding the message, it was ensuring no one thought to look in the first place. The Pilgrim Disguise was pure genius, not just because it worked, but because it weaponized something far more powerful than stealth: respect. In an era when faith shaped every aspect of life, pilgrims moved through the world with a kind of sacred immunity. Their dusty robes and worn sandals signaled devotion, not danger, making them the last people anyone would suspect of espionage. But beneath their humble exteriors, these couriers carried secrets that could alter the fate of empires, hidden in the very objects meant to symbolize piety. Take the scrolls they carried, thick parchment rolls tied with simple cords, identical to those any pilgrim might use for daily prayers. except some had been carefully altered. A courier's scroll might look ordinary at first glance, but its wooden dowel could be hollow, drilled out to hold a tightly rolled missive. Others had layers of parchment glued together, with messages tucked between them, invisible unless you knew to peel the sheets apart. Some even used ink that faded after writing, leaving prayers visible on the surface while critical intelligence lay concealed beneath, waiting to be revealed with lemon juice or candle heat. The brilliance of this disguise went deeper than clever hiding spots. Pilgrims had a perfect excuse to travel long distances, often across hostile borders. Journeying to Jerusalem, Rome, or Santiago de Compostela meant crossing through territories where ordinary messengers would be stopped and questioned. But a pilgrim, their goal was seen as noble even by enemies. Many feudal lords and border guards, fearing divine retribution, hesitated to delay or harass them. Some couriers took this further, embedding themselves in groups of real pilgrims, their fake relics and rehearsed stories making them indistinguishable from the truly devout. During the Crusades, this method became indispensable. With Christian and Muslim forces locked in brutal conflict, the usual trade routes were fraught with danger. But pilgrims still flowed toward holy sites, their movements less scrutinized than soldiers or merchants. A courier posing as a Franciscan friar, for example, could pass through checkpoints with a satchel full of seemingly innocent scriptures, one of which contained battle plans etched in tiny script along the margins. Others carried wooden crosses with removable bases, their hollow interiors stuffed with folded maps or lists of allied sympathizers. What's striking is how these couriers exploited the era's deep superstitions. Many guards feared tampering with religious objects, worrying they might incur bad luck or divine wrath. A particularly shrewd courier might even stage a loud prayer session if searched, loudly invoking saints to protect his sacred items, a performance that often made nervous soldiers wave him through. And because pilgrims frequently begged for food or shelter, they had reason to linger near castles or military camps, listening for useful gossip while pretending to focus only on spiritual matters. The pilgrim disguise wasn't just about blending in, it was about becoming untouchable. By wrapping themselves in the cloak of faith, these couriers turned society's reverence into their greatest asset. Their stories remind us that the best disguises aren't just physical, they're psychological, bending perceptions until even the sharpest eyes see only what they expect to see. And in a world where faith moved mountains, it's no surprise it also moved secrets. Music and espionage might seem like strange bedfellows, but in the medieval world, minstrels were the perfect cover for covert operations. These traveling entertainers had something priceless: unrestricted access. From smoky taverns to the grandest royal courts, no doors were closed to a skilled musician. Their presence was expected, even welcomed, in spaces where armed guards would stop a soldier or suspiciously scrutinize a merchant, and that made them ideal couriers, turning every lute string and drumbeat into a potential vehicle for secrets. The real brilliance lay in how they weaponized their art. Some encoded messages directly into their lyrics, swapping out verses or altering traditional songs to convey hidden meanings. A ballad about a love-struck knight might, to the right ears, contain coded troop movements or warnings of an impending attack. Others took a more tactile approach, modifying their instruments into elaborate hiding places. A lute sound hole could conceal a rolled parchment tucked just beneath the strings, invisible unless you knew to reach inside. Some even crafted false bottoms in their drum cases, creating compartments where documents could lie undisturbed beneath a layer of sheet music or spare drumheads. But the minstrel's greatest advantage wasn't just their ability to hide things, it was their power to distract. A lively performance could draw every eye in the room, giving an accomplice the chance to slip a letter into a nobleman's pocket or retrieve one from a prearranged drop point. And since minstrels were often invited to linger requested to play for private dinners or after-dinner entertainments, they had ample time to observe, eavesdrop, and memorize critical details. A seemingly innocent song about harvests might actually be a clever way to report on grain supplies in a besieged castle, while a humorous ditty about a drunken lord could smuggle insults meant to undermine an enemy's reputation. Some of the boldest operatives didn't just carry messages, they became full-time minstrels building years of credibility. Imagine a spy who'd performed at the same duke's birthday feast 3 years running. By the time he needed to transport sensitive information, his face was familiar, his backstory unquestioned. This long-game approach blurred the line between disguise and reality, with some couriers continuing their musical careers long after their espionage work ended. After all, what better way to stay informed than to remain embedded in the very circles you once spied on? The minstrel's role as courier reveals a deeper truth about medieval society. Entertainment was the ultimate Trojan horse. In a world where news traveled slowly and official messengers were watched, the humble musician moved freely, singing secrets in plain sight. Their stories remind us that sometimes the best way to hide isn't in shadows, but in the spotlight where everyone's too busy clapping along to notice the deception. Beggars were the invisible carriers of medieval secrets, hiding in plain sight on every street corner. While nobles and merchants drew attention, these seemingly destitute figures shuffled through towns unnoticed, precisely why they became some of history's most effective couriers. Their tattered cloaks and worn-out shoes weren't just costumes, they were tactical gear. A beggar's frayed sleeve might conceal a scrap of parchment soaked in invisible ink, its message legible only when held over a candle flame. Another might scratch coded symbols into the dirt with their walking stick, leaving temporary signals for allies while guards dismissed them as harmless scribbles. The real stroke of genius exploiting society's indifference, most people averted their eyes from beggars, repelled by their grime or convinced they had nothing worth stealing. That assumption became the courier's greatest weapon. A beggar crouched outside a tavern could eavesdrop on drunken soldiers boasting of troop movements, then etch the details into a piece of bark with onion juice, an early form of invisible ink that darkened when heated. Others pinned folded messages beneath layers of filthy rags, knowing even the most thorough pickpocket wouldn't rummage through their lice-ridden clothing. Some took the ruse further, using their bodies as living parchment. A courier might smear a mixture of milk and vinegar across their skin, writing directly on their arm or chest. Once dry, the message vanished until brushed with vinegar-soaked cloth. Others sewed tiny vials of revealing agents into their hems, ready to expose hidden text at a moment's notice. The most audacious even posed as lepers, their bandages serving as both disguise and delivery system, untouchable in every sense. What's haunting is how these methods mirrored the beggars' real lives. Just as society ignored their suffering, it overlooked their espionage. A courier limping past a city gate, his bowl clinking with a few pitiful coins, could be carrying battle plans that would decide a war. And because beggars were mobile by necessity, driven from one town to another by harsh laws or dwindling alms, their movements rarely raised suspicion. A nobleman's sudden journey might prompt questions, but who would interrogate a starving man searching for bread? The legacy of these couriers lingers in unexpected ways. Their tactics blurred the line between survival and subterfuge, proving that the most powerful disguises aren't elaborate, they're the ones no one thinks to question. In a world that refused to see them, beggars didn't just deliver messages, they became them. Blacksmiths were the overlooked architects of medieval espionage, their hammer strikes masking the tap-tap of coded messages being etched into metal. In an age where every castle and army needed their services, these soot-covered craftsmen moved freely between enemy camps and fortified cities, their aprons bristling with tools that doubled as hiding places. A seemingly ordinary tong might have a hollow handle, its interior just wide enough to hold a tightly rolled slip of parchment. Even the humble horseshoe, tossed carelessly into a pile of spares, could bear tiny engravings along its inner curve, scratches that, to the untrained eye, looked like imperfections in the metal, but to a spy's ally, spelled out troop numbers or supply routes. The forge itself became a theater of deception. The constant clang of hammer on anvil drowned out whispered conversations, while the glow of the furnace let couriers burn incriminating notes in seconds. Some blacksmiths crafted special daggers with pommels that unscrewed, revealing compartments for folded maps. Others worked coded symbols into the decorative scrollwork of noblemen's swords, elegant flourishes that secretly marked the weapon's recipient as a traitor or ally. One particularly bold operative in 14th century France even delivered an entire battle plan stamped onto thin sheets of lead, rolled into scrolls small enough to nest inside the hollow core of a wagon axle. When captured and searched, he appeared to be carrying nothing but replacement parts for a broken cart. What made the blacksmith disguise so effective was its dual purpose. Not only could they transport secrets, they could create them. A courier posing as an armorer might repair a knight's breastplate by riveting a layer of thin metal inside, its surface etched with intelligence only visible if held at the right angle to the light. Others used the casting process itself to hide messages, embedding tiny wax tablets inscribed with notes into the molds for belt buckles or hinges. Once molten metal filled the mold, the wax melted away, leaving the message permanently sealed inside, accessible only if the object was later broken apart. But perhaps the cleverest trick was how these couriers weaponized their indispensability. A blacksmith summoned to sharpen a lord's swords or shoe his horses was rarely turned away, even in times of war. Their skills granted them access to barracks, stables, and even council chambers where plans were drafted. And because their work required constant travel, to mines for iron, to forests for charcoal, their movements raised no suspicion. A spy might spend months embedded in an enemy castle, quietly noting guard rotations while hammering out arrowheads, his true mission known only to the handful of allies who'd recognized the deliberate flaw he left in the sixth nail of every crate, a signal that fresh intelligence lay hidden beneath the forge's loose brick. The blacksmith's legacy in espionage reminds us that the best hiding places aren't always the most elaborate. Sometimes they're the things we overlook every day, the nails that hold our world together, the tools we trust without question. In an era defined by clanging metal and roaring fires, these couriers proved that secrets could be as strong as steel and twice as sharp. Nuns moved through the medieval world with a quiet authority that made them ideal couriers, not despite their piety, but because of it. Their simple habits, often dismissed as mere symbols of devotion, became perfect vessels for secrets. The heavy folds of wool concealed more than modesty. Deep sleeves could hold slim cylinders of parchment sewn into the lining, while rosary beads sometimes dangled hollow crucifixes containing coded messages. Even the wimples, those crisp, white headdresses framing their faces, could be starched just enough to stiffen hidden compartments between the layers of linen. Convents served as the perfect waystations for clandestine communications. While castles and market towns bustled with prying eyes, monasteries operated under an unspoken rule of discretion. A visiting nun delivering prayer requests from another abbey might actually be passing battle plans between allied lords. Some religious houses developed elaborate systems for this very purpose, with trusted sisters assigned to memorize oral messages or encode letters within seemingly mundane correspondence about feast days or fabric donations. The abbess of a Rhineland convent in the 12th century famously used her illuminated manuscripts as cover, embedding critical intelligence within the decorative borders, tiny dots on flower petals, spelling out enemy troop positions when read in sequence. The genius of this disguise lay in its psychological armor. Searching a nun wasn't just impractical, it was sacrilegious. Guards who wouldn't hesitate to search a merchant would balk at demanding a sister remove her scapular, fearing divine retribution. This reluctance gave couriers an extraordinary advantage. One account describes a novice smuggling a treaty across enemy territory by pinning it beneath her veil, the document pressed flat against her hair where no soldier dared to look. Others sewed letters into the hems of their habits, knowing the rough wool would deter all but the most determined inspectors. But perhaps the most audacious tactic involved the sacred itself. Some nuns carried pyx boxes, small vessels meant for consecrated bread with false bottoms containing ciphers instead of communion wafers. To open one without cause was considered a mortal sin, making these containers virtually untouchable. Others exploited the tradition of sealed letters between convents, their wax imprinted not with a family crest but with the faint ridges of a key, a signal to allies that the envelope's innocuous blessings about harvest yields actually detailed supply routes. What's striking is how these women turned societal constraints into tools of empowerment. In an era when women had limited autonomy, their religious vows granted them mobility and trust that few others enjoyed. A noblewoman traveling alone might spark gossip, but a nun on pilgrimage, her journey was seen as righteous, and because convents were often centers of learning, many sisters could read and write skills that let them encrypt messages in Latin or Greek, adding another layer of secrecy. The legacy of these couriers lingers in unexpected places. Next time you see a medieval painting of a nun with her hands folded demurely in her lap, consider what might be hidden beneath those voluminous sleeves. In a world that underestimated them, these women didn't just carry messages, they quietly shaped the course of history, one sacred sealed letter at a time. There's something beautifully simple about hiding secrets in plain sight, especially when that hiding place is something as ordinary as a loaf of bread. Bakers were the perfect cover for medieval couriers because their work was essential, predictable, and utterly unremarkable. Who would suspect the flour-dusted man delivering breakfast rolls of carrying anything more than a basket of warm pastries? Yet beneath that crusty exterior, some loaves held more than just rye and yeast. The method was as practical as it was ingenious. A freshly baked loaf could be hollowed out while still warm, its soft interior scooped out just enough to nestle a small scroll or folded parchment inside. Once cooled, the bread's crust hardened, sealing the message away without a trace. If confronted by guards, the courier could simply tear off a piece and eat it, destroying the evidence in seconds. Some even baked the message directly into the dough, wrapping it in a thin layer of wax before encasing it in the loaf's center, ensuring the heat of the oven wouldn't damage the ink. But the real stroke of brilliance was in the delivery system itself. Bakers traveled daily between castles, monasteries, and market squares, their arrivals as routine as sunrise. A courier posing as a baker's apprentice could move unchallenged through guarded gates, his basket of bread offering the perfect excuse to enter restricted areas. Some went further, embedding signals into their goods, a specific pattern of slashes on a loaf's crust, or an extra twist in a pastry's shape, to alert recipients that a message lay hidden inside. Flour sacks became another unexpected tool. While most were simple burlap containers, some were specially crafted with false bottoms or interior pockets. A courier might pour out flour for a castle's kitchen, only to reveal a sealed letter nestled at the bottom once the sack was empty. Others used the flour itself as camouflage, dusting messages with a fine layer of white powder so they'd blend seamlessly into the sack's contents unless carefully sifted out. What made this disguise so effective was its sheer mundanity. Unlike a merchant's wagon or a pilgrim's scroll, bread was perishable. Guards rarely bothered to inspect something that would be crumbs by nightfall. And because bakers handled food, searchers were less invasive. No one wanted to contaminate a noble supper by digging through it with dirty hands. The most daring operatives even used the baking process to their advantage, timing deliveries so that fresh bread arrived just as council meetings began, ensuring messages reached their recipients at the exact moment they were needed. The legacy of these edible espionage tactics lingers in our language today. Ever heard the phrase, "the best thing since sliced bread"? For medieval couriers, it wasn't just good, it was the perfect cover. Physicians and apothecaries wielded a unique kind of power in the medieval world, the power to walk straight into the chambers of kings and the tents of generals without raising an eyebrow. While others needed invitations or threats to gain access, healers were welcomed everywhere, their satchels of herbs and potions offering the perfect camouflage for clandestine messages. Imagine a doctor bending over a nobleman's sick, seemingly focused on diagnosing a fever while beneath the linen wrappings of his medical supplies lay a tiny scroll, its contents so sensitive that even the patient couldn't be trusted with it. The tools of their trade became instruments of espionage. Glass vials meant for tonics could hold tightly rolled slips of parchment, submerged in liquid to make them appear part of the medicine. Some physicians crafted hollowed-out pestles, their interiors just wide enough to conceal a coded message, while others used the wax seals on their jars to imprint microscopic symbols, dots and dashes hidden within the intricate designs that only a trained ally would recognize. Even the humble leech jar, with its murky water and squirming contents, might have a false bottom, separating the creatures from the documents below. But the real stroke of genius was how they weaponized their prescriptions. A seemingly ordinary recipe for a sleeping draught could contain hidden meaning, the quantities of valerian and chamomile corresponding to troop numbers or dates of planned attacks. Some apothecaries developed entire cipher systems based on herb lore, where 3 parts foxglove signaled a meeting place and a pinch of nightshade warned of betrayal. These coded instructions blended so seamlessly into legitimate medical notes that only those privy to the system could decode them. To anyone else, it was just another remedy for gout. Their access to the powerful made them especially dangerous or invaluable, depending on which side you were on. A physician treating a duke's indigestion could linger at court for days, eavesdropping on war councils while pretending to adjust bandages. Some even played on their patients' superstitions, claiming certain medicinal letters needed to be burned after reading, ensuring sensitive information vanished in the fireplace, leaving no trace. Others exploited the trust placed in them, smuggling messages inside the very medicines they administered, knowing no one would dare interfere with a treatment ordered by the king's own doctor. Perhaps the most chilling tactic was their use of urgency. When a healer rushed through castle halls claiming a patient's life was at stake, guards stepped aside without question. That same urgency let couriers bypass checkpoints and curfews, their grim expressions discouraging delays. Some even staged mock emergencies, a sudden fainting spell in a crowded market, to create diversions while accomplices slipped through gates or exchanged documents. The legacy of these physician couriers lingers in our modern distrust of too convenient coincidences. Their stories remind us that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't carried by shadowy figures in alleyways, but by the very people we invite into our most vulnerable moments, hands stained with ink instead of blood. hiding wars in their medicine bags. Falconers moved through the medieval world with an air of privilege that opened doors no spy could knock down. While their birds hunted prey, these skilled handlers became hunters of another sort, masters of discreet communication. The sport of falconry wasn't just a pastime for the nobility, it was a golden ticket granting couriers access to the innermost circles of power under the perfect pretext. After all, what lord would refuse a visiting falconer offering to train his prized peregrine or treat its ailments? The birds themselves became living carriers. Notes written on thin vellum could be rolled into tiny cylinders and secured beneath a falcon's leg strap, camouflaged by the leather jesses that already wrapped around their talons. Some handlers crafted special hoods with hidden compartments in the stitching, a falcon's blindfold doubling as a secret pouch. Even the bells attached to the bird's legs occasionally served a dual purpose, their hollow interiors just large enough to hold a slip of parchment. The real stroke of genius, falcons were temperamental. If a guard reached too close, the bird might lash out with razor-sharp talons, discouraging thorough inspections. But the falconer's true advantage lay in their mobility. These weren't just occasional visitors. They followed a seasonal circuit, moving between castles to tend to noblemen's birds as predictably as geese migrating south. A courier could establish himself as a trusted trainer in one court, then weeks later appear at a rival's stronghold with fresh instructions for care, really coded updates on troop movements. Some even exploited the birds' natural behavior, releasing them to fly back to their home mews carrying messages, a practice so ordinary it drew no suspicion. The most daring operatives weaponized the spectacle of falconry itself. During hunts, when all eyes tracked the bird's dizzying dives, a handler might slip into the castle's solar to exchange letters hidden inside a bag of raw meat meant for the falcon. Others used the birds as distractions. A well-timed escape of a gyrfalcon could send a whole courtyard into chaos, giving accomplices precious minutes to pass documents unnoticed. What's fascinating is how this disguise blurred the line between observer and participant. A falconer standing at a lord's elbow during a hunt overheard every unguarded comment, every boast about military strategy. Their very invisibility, so often dismissed as just help, made them perfect spies, and when the time came to send word, their feathered accomplices were already waiting, talons sheathed in secrecy. A dyer's workshop was more than just a place of vibrant hues. It was a clandestine communication hub where fabric became the perfect medium for secrets. While most saw only bolts of richly colored wool or linen, couriers saw endless possibilities in the folds and dyes. A message could be tucked between layers of cloth, pressed so flat it vanished into the weave, or stitched along a selvage edge where stray threads disguised the tampering. But the real artistry lay in the dyes themselves. Certain colors, when arranged in specific sequences, could convey entire messages without a single written word. A scarlet stripe followed by indigo might signal an impending attack, while ochre and sage green could mark a safe house's location. The brilliance of this method was its seamless integration into everyday commerce. Dyers regularly transported their wares between cities, their carts piled high with fabrics destined for noble households or merchant stalls. Inspecting every inch of these textiles would mean unrolling and re-rolling dozens of bolts, a tedious task most guards avoided unless given strong reason. Clever couriers exploited this perfectly, sometimes even weighting the cores of fabric rolls with lead to make them too heavy to unroll casually. Others went further, using the dyeing process itself to encode information. A seemingly random pattern of dots on a length of cloth could be a map when held to light, the faintest variations in dye density revealing hidden paths or strongholds. Some operatives turned the very nature of their trade into an advantage. Since dyers often worked with imported pigments, rare spices like saffron for yellow, crushed insects for crimson, their shipments were already subject to tariffs and inspections. Over time, customs officials grew numb to the routine, glancing at the same barrels of madder root or woad without a second thought. That complacency became the courier's best friend. One recorded case from Venice describes a dyer who smuggled an entire treaty inside a vat of fermenting indigo. The document sealed in a waxed pouch and submerged for weeks until the stench of the dye vat deterred even the most diligent searchers. What made this disguise so enduring was its flexibility. Unlike rigid containers or fixed hiding spots, fabric could be adapted on the fly. A courier cornered in a market might accidentally drop a bolt into a puddle, ruining the outer layers but preserving the message buried within. Others used the fabric itself as a key, tearing off a corner with a particular dye pattern to prove their identity to contacts. The most sophisticated systems even employed double-layered cloth, where scraping away the surface dye revealed an entirely different pattern beneath, like a hidden map emerging under friction. The legacy of these colorful spies lingers in unexpected ways. Next time you see a medieval tapestry, look closely at those intricate borders. What appears to be mere decoration might just be a secret waiting to be read. In a world where information was power, dyers didn't just color fabric, they wove deception into the very threads of history. Butchers wielded cleavers and saws, their hands stained red, not just from meat but from the blood of secrets they carried. In the medieval world, where fresh meat was a constant necessity for castles and armies, these tradesmen moved with unquestioned freedom. Their carts piled high with carcasses became rolling vaults, their contents too foul-smelling and slippery for most guards to inspect closely. A message wrapped in a scrap of damp animal hide could be tucked beneath a haunch of venison, the natural oils preserving the parchment while the stench of raw meat kept prying hands at bay. The real ingenuity lay in the butcher's tools themselves. A cleaver's wooden handle might be hollowed out, its end cap twisting off to reveal a tiny compartment. Sausage casings, those translucent tubes of intestine, could be stuffed with thin rolls of parchment before being filled with ground meat, the document cooked right into the links. Some butchers even used the bones, drilling tiny holes into the marrow cavity of a beef shank and plugging it with wax to conceal a scrap of vellum inside. To anyone else, it was just another cut of meat awaiting the stew pot. Timing played a crucial role in this gruesome trade. Fresh kills had to be delivered quickly before spoiling, giving couriers a built-in excuse for urgency. A butcher racing to beat the heat of midday could barrel through checkpoints with barely a pause, shouting about rot and ruined merchandise if guards delayed him. Others exploited seasonal rhythms like the autumnal slaughter when livestock was thinned for winter. With hundreds of carcasses moving between estates, one extra pig carrying a coded message in its belly went entirely unnoticed. Perhaps the most daring trick was the special order. A nobleman requesting a rare cut, say, a boar's heart or swan's liver, provided the perfect cover. The butcher would deliver it personally, the prized meat arranged just so on a bed of herbs beneath which lay a letter pressed flat as a leaf. Even if a suspicious steward peeled back the garnish, the sight of raw organ meat usually ended the inspection there. What's striking is how these couriers turned revulsion into a weapon. In an era before refrigeration, the visceral reality of their trade, the blood, the flies, the reek of offal created a natural barrier. Guards who'd happily dig through a merchant's silks would recoil from rooting through a barrel of salted tongues or sheep's heads. The butcher's disguise didn't just hide messages, it made people want to look away. And in that moment of disgust, history's quietest couriers walked right through the gates. Pottery might seem like the last place you'd hide a royal secret after all, What's more fragile than a clay jug? But that's exactly why it worked. In the bustling markets of medieval Europe, potters hauled carts stacked high with bowls, pitchers, and urns, their wares clinking together with every bump in the road. To guards at city gates, these breakable goods were a nuisance to inspect. Digging through them risked shattering someone's expensive dinnerware and inviting a merchant's wrath. That reluctance became the courier's greatest advantage. The trick lay in the craftsmanship. A skilled potter could throw a vessel with a false bottom, its inner compartment accessible only by pouring water into the jug at a precise angle, releasing a hidden catch. Others crafted lids with hollow knobs, the tiny space inside just large enough for a scrap of parchment rolled tighter than a twig. Some even exploited the pottery's unfinished state. Messages were pressed into the soft clay before firing, then concealed beneath a layer of glaze. To anyone running their hands over the surface, the jar felt perfectly smooth. Only by smashing it open would the recipient discover the secret etched into the clay beneath. But the real stroke of genius was how couriers turned fragility into a feature. A merchant transporting delicate ceramics moved carefully, avoiding jostling or sudden stops, behavior that mimicked the cautious pace of someone hiding something. And if cornered, a well-placed accident could send a suspicious-looking pot tumbling to the ground, reducing incriminating evidence to shards before anyone could intervene. Some operatives took this further, baking messages into unglazed tiles or roof shingles, items so ordinary they were ignored in transit, but when broken apart at their destination, revealed maps or treaties hidden in their porous cores. The most audacious schemes involved the kilns themselves. Potters often shared communal firing spaces, their wares stacked side by side during baking. A courier could slip a single special piece into the batch, a wine jug with a compartment holding a tiny silver tube, its contents protected from the kiln's heat by a layer of ash. After firing, the jug looked identical to its counterparts, leaving no trace of tampering. Even the clay's color played a role. Red earthenware from one region might be rarer elsewhere, making certain pots instantly recognizable to allies while blending into the background for everyone else. What's fascinating is how these methods mirrored everyday life. Broken pottery was so common that shards littered every medieval town, discarded, repurposed, or trodden into the mud. A courier could drop a message-laden vessel in a prearranged spot, knowing its fragments would go unnoticed until an ally gathered them up like puzzle pieces. In a world where clay was cheap but secrets priceless, these humble craftsmen proved that sometimes the best hiding places aren't strongboxes or locked chests. They're the things we handle every day, then toss aside without a second thought. Barber surgeons walked a razor's edge between healer and spy, their very profession a perfect cover for clandestine operations. In an age when these itinerant practitioners handled everything from tooth extractions to battlefield amputations, no one questioned the odd-looking tools in their kits. Yet some of those instruments held more than just scalpels and bone saws. A razor's hollow handle might conceal a scrap of parchment rolled tight as a cigarette, while the leather strap used to sharpen blades could be stitched with coded messages visible only when held to candlelight. Even the seemingly innocent act of lathering a nobleman's beard became an opportunity, the courier's fingers deftly tucking a note beneath the wash basin while their client's eyes were closed against the soap. The brilliance of this disguise lay in its brutal necessity. Barber surgeons were among the few allowed to touch aristocrats with sharp objects, their access to vulnerable moments unparalleled. A lord leaning back for a shave couldn't wear armor or keep a hand on his dagger, creating a rare window of trust. Some operatives exploited this intimacy by whispering intelligence as they worked, their voices drowned out by the scrape of steel against stubble. Others went further, crafting special cupping glasses with false bottoms, devices meant to draw out, bad blood, could just as easily hide a folded letter beneath their suction cups. War zones offered particularly fertile ground for these covert exchanges. A barber surgeon moving between enemy camps to tend the wounded carried an unspoken neutrality, their presence tolerated even amid fierce hostilities. One account from the 100 Years' War describes an English courier who sewed troop movements into the lining of his blood-stained apron, knowing the grisly stains would deter inspection. Another, working during the Crusades, used his lancets to etch tiny maps onto the handles of his tools, visible only under magnification, like early microfilm. Perhaps the most audacious tactic involved the jars of leeches barber surgeons carried to balance humors. These wriggling creatures became living camouflage, their murky water concealing wax-sealed tubes at the bottom of the jar. A courier needing to destroy evidence could simply feed the incriminating paper to the leeches, whose digestive acids reduced parchment to pulp within hours. Others exploited the theatrical nature of their work, staging dramatic bleedings where the spurting blood masked the passing of documents between accomplices. What made these operatives so effective wasn't just their tools, but their timing. In an era before daily hygiene, even kings needed regular shaves and haircuts, creating predictable opportunities for contact. A barber summoned to a monarch's chambers might trim his beard one day and deliver a treasonous proposition the next, all while the royal guard stood watch outside, oblivious. The very ordinariness of their work, the snipping of nails, the draining of boils, rendered them invisible. After all, who would suspect the man holding a basin for vomit to also be holding the keys to a rebellion? Their legacy lingers in plain sight. Next time you see an antique razor in a museum, look closely at that worn wooden handle. The stains you see might not just be from soap and steel, but from the invisible ink of history's most unlikely messengers. Fishermen knew the sea's rhythms better than any king knew his court, and that made them perfect couriers. While nobles slept behind castle walls, these weathered souls hauled their nets in the pre-dawn gloom, their boats bobbing in waters too shallow for warships and too murky for prying eyes. The same isolation that made fishing a lonely trade also made it ideal for espionage. A message sealed in waxed leather could be weighted with a stone and dropped overboard at a precise spot, where the next tide would carry it to a waiting ally downstream. Others tucked notes into hollow floats, letting them drift like ordinary debris until plucked from the waves by knowing hands. The real stroke of genius was how fishermen weaponized the mundane. A basket of writhing eels became the perfect distraction, who'd dig through slimy creatures to check for hidden compartments in the wicker. Nets themselves could be rigged with special knots, their intricate weavings signaling everything from safe landing spots to impending raids. Some operatives even used fish guts as camouflage, wrapping documents in clean bladders before stuffing them back into the bellies of their catch. Delivered to a castle kitchen, the fresh fish would be slit open by a cook, revealing not entrails but intelligence. Coastal villages became hubs of this watery espionage, fishermen speaking in coded terms about the mackerel run or a storm brewing east could coordinate entire resistance movements under the noses of occupying forces. One account from Normandy describes a fleet that staged fake quarrels over fishing rights, their shouted arguments actually conveying troop numbers and supply routes to listeners on shore. Others exploited the superstitions of the era, claiming certain coves were haunted to keep outsiders away from their drop points. But perhaps the most daring tactic involved the boats themselves. Hulls could be modified with hidden compartments beneath the ballast stones, accessible only by removing a specific plank when the vessel was ashore. Some fishermen crafted oars with hollow shafts, the ends sealed with pitch to keep messages dry even if the boat capsized. The bravest operatives didn't just carry secrets, They became them, tattooing maps or codes onto their own skin beneath layers of salt-stained clothing. What set these couriers apart was their intimate knowledge of nature's patterns. They understood how currents shifted with the moon, which beaches were deserted at high tide, and how to vanish into the fog like ghosts. While knights clattered across drawbridges, fishermen slipped through the world's back door, their nets hauling in more than just fish. They pulled history's strings. Tanners lived in a world of salt and brine, their workshops reeking of curing hides, a stench so potent it became their greatest asset. While others recoiled from the odor, couriers saw opportunity in every vat of tanning solution. A belt fresh from the dye bath wasn't just an accessory. Its layered leather could be peeled apart like pastry, a secret message pressed between the plies before being resealed with a craftsman's precision. Even the humble waterskin, sloshing with liquid to keep its shape during transport, might have its stitching loosened just enough to slip a parchment inside, the waxed interior protecting the contents from moisture. The brilliance of this disguise lay in its ubiquity. From knights to cobblers, everyone needed leather goods, making tanners' carts as common as dirt on medieval roads. A courier posing as an apprentice could deliver samples to a castle's armorer, bundles of straps and pouches with one specially crafted piece, a sword sheath with a hidden channel along its spine, or a saddlebag whose decorative tooling actually marked drop points for future exchanges. Some even exploited the leather's natural imperfections, using scars and blemishes on hides as coded maps when held to light. But the real stroke of genius was how they weaponized the curing process itself. Messages written in alum solution, a key tanning agent, would darken over time as the leather aged, emerging like invisible ink. One recorded case from Burgundy describes a rebel leader receiving a seemingly blank belt, only to watch battle coordinates appear weeks later as the tannins reacted with the hidden writing. Others soaked entire documents in oak gall solution, rendering them translucent until dipped in vinegar at their destination, the text surging back into visibility. Perhaps the most audacious trick involved the tanners' aprons, thick, stiffened hides worn to protect against spills. Guards reluctant to touch the foul-smelling garments often waved their wearers through checkpoints without inspection. Little did they know some aprons had pockets sewn between the layers, their openings disguised by overlapping tooling patterns. A courier could carry half a dozen letters at once, the weight dismissed as mere water absorption. What made these operatives so effective was their dual role as creators and distributors. Unlike merchants who merely transported goods, tanners handled raw materials at every stage, from fleshing hides to polishing finished wares. This gave them cover to alter products mid-process without arousing suspicion. A messenger might ruin a batch with extra tannin, knowing the darkened leather would later reveal its secrets under the right conditions. Others stitched coded symbols into the lining of gloves, their meaning felt rather than seen by allies running fingers along the seams. Their legacy lingers in the very language of secrecy. When we say something is under your nose, we forget it was the tanners who proved that sometimes the best hiding place isn't in shadows, it's in the one smell everyone avoids. Masons moved through medieval Europe like whispers in stone, their hands shaping cathedrals and castles while their secrets lay buried in the very walls they built. These craftsmen enjoyed a rare privilege, unrestricted travel between construction sites, their skills in such demand that no lord would turn them away. But some carried more than chisels and measuring rods. A seemingly ordinary block of limestone might bear a hollowed-out core, its interior space just large enough to hold a tightly rolled parchment before being sealed with a wafer-thin layer of mortar. Once set into place among thousands of identical stones, it became as permanent and as invisible as the fortress itself. The brilliance of this method lay in its slow revelation. Unlike merchants who needed to deliver goods quickly or pilgrims racing against the seasons, masons worked on timelines spanning decades. A message hidden in a cathedral's foundation might not be retrieved until years later, when an allied mason accidentally chipped away at precisely the right spot during repairs. Some operatives carved coded symbols into decorative elements, a fleur-de-lis with one extra petal, or a gargoyle's wing tilted at an odd angle, signaling the location of concealed compartments to those who knew how to read the stone like a map. Their tools became instruments of deception. A trowel's handle could unscrew to reveal a hollow chamber, while a plumb line's weight might split open to expose a tiny scroll wrapped around its core. Even the chalk lines marking cuts held potential. Certain patterns of dashes could convey troop movements when read vertically instead of horizontally. One recorded case from Wales describes a mason who etched an entire invasion plan into the underside of a castle's new hearthstone, knowing the heat would darken the grooves over time, making the carving visible only when the fire was lit. What made this disguise so enduring was its collaborative nature. Stonemasons worked in guilds, passing knowledge through generations like sacred texts. A courier could embed himself in these close-knit circles, learning regional techniques that made his cover flawless. When questioned, he could speak knowledgeably about load-bearing ratios or the quirks of local quarry stone, details no imposter would know. Some even left deliberate mistakes in their work, a misplaced keystone or slightly uneven arch that served as a signal to allies while appearing as ordinary human error to others. Perhaps the most audacious tactic involved the scaffolds themselves. Temporary structures erected during construction became perfect drop points, messages tucked between wooden planks or slipped into hollow reed poles used for measuring. Since scaffolds were constantly being dismantled and rebuilt, these hiding spots were ephemeral by design. A courier could retrieve intelligence during his lunch break, pocketing a wax-sealed tube from between the slats before the afternoon's work began. Others used the rhythmic clang of mallets to mask whispered conversations, their voices lost in the symphony of construction. The legacy of these stony spies endures in the monuments they left behind. Next time you run your fingers over the weathered carvings of a medieval church, consider this. Those grooves might not just be the work of time. They could be the deliberate marks of history's most patient messengers, who understood that some secrets aren't meant to be carried, they're meant to be set in stone. Weavers didn't just create fabric, they wove secrets into the very threads of medieval life. In an era where every noble household prized tapestries for both warmth and status, these artisans had unparalleled access to castles and courts. But beneath the vibrant dyes and intricate patterns lay something far more valuable than wool or silk: coded messages, hidden maps, and even entire battle plans stitched into the warp and weft. A courier posing as a weaver didn't just carry information, they turned it into art, crafting textiles that whispered secrets to those who knew how to listen. Take something as simple as a length of linen. To the untrained eye, it might look like any other bolt of cloth, but a closer inspection could reveal deliberate irregularities in the weave, a skipped thread here, a tightened knot there, forming a cipher readable only by running fingertips along the surface. Some weavers went further, dyeing individual threads with plant-based inks that changed color when exposed to heat or vinegar, revealing hidden words or symbols when treated. Others embedded maps into tapestries, where the winding paths of embroidered rivers traced real-world routes, and castle motifs marked strategic strongholds. The Bayeux Tapestry itself, that famous chronicle of the Norman conquest, is rumored to contain more than just historical scenes. Some scholars believe its borders hide coded messages about William the Conqueror's supply lines, disguised as decorative flourishes. The real stroke of genius was how these couriers exploited the very process of their craft. A weaver's loom, with its labyrinth of threads, could be rigged to create patterns that only made sense when viewed from a specific angle or under certain light. Some operatives used the selvage, the tightly woven edge of the fabric, to conceal tiny scrolls rolled into the fibers, while others sewed messages into the hems of finished garments destined for noble recipients. Even the humble distaff used for spinning wool might have a hollow core where a slip of parchment could be tucked, invisible until the spindle was broken apart. But perhaps the most daring tactic involved the yarn itself. Skeins could be wound around hollow wooden bobbins, their centers packed with tightly folded letters. A courier delivering fresh yarn to a castle sewing room might hand off what appeared to be ordinary supplies, while the real message lay hidden inside, waiting for the right hands to unwind it. Others used the dye lots as code. A specific sequence of colors in a woven belt could signal meeting times or danger, like a silent alarm woven in scarlet and gold. What made this disguise so enduring was its sheer ubiquity. Every household, from peasant to king, relied on weavers for everything from sackcloth to coronation robes. Their work was so commonplace that it became invisible, their movements as unremarkable as the turning of a spinning wheel. And in that invisibility, they carried the threads of history, stitching secrets into the fabric of an era. Herbalists moved through the medieval world with a quiet authority, their satchels brimming with life-saving remedies and sometimes deadly secrets. To the untrained eye, their bundles of dried herbs and roots looked harmless, just another healer gathering ingredients for tinctures and poultices. But in the right hands, those very plants became tools of deception. A sprig of rosemary might conceal a rolled parchment tucked between its needles, while a hollowed-out mandrake root could shelter a tiny vial of invisible ink. Even the humble burlap sacks used to carry herbs had their uses. Some were stitched with double layers, creating hidden pockets where letters could lie flat against the rough fabric, undetectable unless you knew exactly where to feel. What made herbalists such effective couriers wasn't just their ability to hide things, it was their mastery of perception. Their work required them to know which plants calmed fevers and which induced them, which berries healed and which killed. That same knowledge let them weaponize their craft. A courier might present a nobleman with a seemingly innocent gift of dried flowers, knowing the recipient would recognize the inclusion of wolfsbane as a silent threat. Others used the language of botany itself to send coded messages. A bouquet containing nightshade, henbane, and monkshood, all deadly in the wrong doses, wasn't just a warning. It was a detailed report on enemy movements, each plant representing a different regiment or strategic weakness. The real genius lay in their unpredictability. Unlike merchants or pilgrims, herbalists didn't follow predictable routes. They chased blooms and fungi in erratic patterns, appearing in valleys after spring rains or high meadows when the first frost came. This made them ghosts in the system here one day, vanished the next, their movements as untraceable as the seeds they scattered. Some operatives took this further, cultivating gardens near border crossings or castle walls, using the plants themselves as signals. A patch of belladonna growing suddenly by a road might mark a safe house, while a wilted cluster of hemlock could warn of nearby patrols. But perhaps their most chilling tactic was the art of the mistake. A skilled herbalist could slip a harmless look-alike into a bundle of medicinal herbs, say, cow parsley resembling poison hemlock, then stage a dramatic discovery when searched. The resulting panic often sent guards scrambling to dump their entire cargo, too rattled to notice the real message hidden in the innocuous chamomile beneath. Others exploited superstition, leaving offerings of elder branches at crossroads to deter pursuit, playing on the old belief that the plant warded off evil. The legacy of these botanical spies lingers in the very language we use today. When we say something is a wolf in sheep's clothing, we forget it was the herbalists who first perfected the art of hiding danger in plain sight, their poisons and cures growing side by side, their secrets rooted deep in the earth. Jewelers moved in circles of glittering deception, where even the most dazzling gems could hide shadows. Their trade gave them access to the inner chambers of power, handling the crowns, brooches, and signet rings of kings and queens, objects so valuable they were rarely inspected, and so personal they were touched only by trusted hands. A courier posing as a jeweler didn't just deliver messages, they embedded them in the very symbols of wealth and authority. A ruby's setting might twist open to reveal a cavity no larger than a grain of rice, perfect for a tightly rolled slip of parchment. Pearls carefully drilled with microscopic holes could be strung on silk threads that, when unraveled, bore coded messages in ink so fine it resembled a hair. The brilliance of this disguise lay in its audacity. Who would dare dismantle a duke's favorite ring or pry apart a queen's necklace on mere suspicion? Jewelers exploited this reluctance masterfully. Some crafted lockets with false backs, the compartments hidden beneath layers of enamel so flawless that even a magnifying glass wouldn't reveal the seam. Others used the stones themselves as carriers, hollowing out softer gems like opals or amber to conceal tiny vials of ink or maps etched onto slivers of bone. One recorded case from 15th century Venice describes a jeweler who delivered an entire treaty inside a sapphire-encrusted goblet, the gemstones along its rim unscrewed to reveal compartments holding treaty clauses, each sealed with wax to prevent moisture damage. But the real stroke of genius was how they weaponized their client's vanity. A noblewoman wouldn't question a jeweler adjusting the clasp of her necklace, giving him precious seconds to slip a note between the links. A king summoning a craftsman to resize his crown might unknowingly receive more than just a better fit. The newly added gold band could bear tiny engravings along its inner edge, invisible unless held at just the right angle to the light. Some jewelers even staged repairs, claiming a gem needed to be reset, only to return it days later with a message sealed beneath the prongs. Perhaps the most daring tactic involved the tools of the trade itself. A jeweler's loupe, that small magnifying lens used to inspect gems, could have its handle hollowed out to hold a scrap of vellum. Polishing cloths, seemingly stained with rouge and grime, might be woven with threads arranged in a cipher, readable only when stretched taut. Even the wax molds used to cast rings served a dual-purpose. Impressions pressed into their surfaces could conceal tiny maps or lists of names, erased forever once the molten metal filled the mold. What set these couriers apart was their understanding of human nature. In a world where gold opened doors and gems bought loyalty, they recognized that the richest secrets weren't hidden in shadows. They were displayed in sunlight, glittering on the fingers and throats of the powerful. And while guards might strip search a beggar or dismantle a merchant's cart, no one would dream of cracking open an emerald to see what lay inside. After all, some treasures were meant to be admired, not examined. Scribes glided through medieval courts like shadows in daylight, their hands always busy, their parchments always blank, and their secrets always hidden in plain sight. While kings and counselors debated wars and treaties, these quiet record-keepers sat at the edges of power, their quills scratching across vellum with practiced indifference. But some of those quills held more than ink. A scribe's toolkit, the knives for trimming parchment, the pots of pigment, even the sand used to dry wet ink could all be repurposed for espionage. The real genius lay in their most ordinary tool, the wax seal. While nobles saw only the stamped symbol of authenticity, couriers saw opportunity. A carefully reheated seal could be lifted and reapplied without leaving a trace, its underside hiding a scrap of parchment no larger than a fingernail. Others went further, mixing alum or lemon juice into their inkwells, creating solutions that dried clear until heated over a flame, revealing entire paragraphs where guards had seen only empty margins. What made scribes so effective wasn't just their tools, it was their invisibility. In an era when few could read, their work was treated like furniture, essential but unnoticed. A courier posing as a scribe could linger for hours in a warlord's tent, ostensibly recording speeches while actually memorizing battle formations. Some operatives developed shorthand systems so dense they resembled scribbles, allowing them to encode messages right alongside official minutes. One account from the Wars of the Roses describes a scribe who transcribed a duke's rantings word for word, then used the same parchment to draft a coded report, his crossed-out mistakes actually forming a map of the castle's weak points when certain letters were connected. The profession's rituals offered perfect cover. Scribes frequently bundled old parchments for storage, tying them with cords that could be loosened and retied to conceal documents between layers. Others exploited the practice of palimpsest, scraping old texts off vellum to reuse it. A courier might accidentally include a fresh sheet among these discards, its surface apparently blank until held at an angle to reveal the ghost of a message etched into the skin. Even the scribe's posture became a weapon. Hunched over their desks, they could pinch the corners of two parchments together, transferring a hidden note with a flick of the wrist while appearing to straighten their papers. But perhaps their most daring tactic was the art of the unfinished ledger. A scribe traveling between castles could carry a half-completed inventory, its pages filled with mundane lists of grain stores or livestock until you reached the middle, where a seemingly spilled inkblot concealed a tiny window cut into the parchment. Behind it lay a second layer, its surface crammed with names, dates, and treasonous alliances. To casual inspection, it was just another messy draft. To an ally holding it up to the light, it was a roadmap to rebellion. The legacy of these scribble spies lingers in the archives, those faded manuscripts lining museum cases. Look closer, the stains might not be accidents, and the blank spaces might not be empty. In a world where words were power, the quietest hands held the sharpest pens. Shepherds knew something most couriers didn't. Sometimes the slowest path was the safest. While messengers on horseback raced down well-guarded roads, these quiet herders moved at the pace of their flocks, their routes meandering through rolling hills and forgotten valleys where soldiers rarely patrolled. To the untrained eye, they were just peasants tending sheep, their days marked by nothing more remarkable than the occasional stray lamb. But hidden in the thick wool of their flocks lay secrets that could shift the balance of power. The method was deceptively simple. A message could be rolled into a tiny scroll and tucked into the dense fleece near a sheep's neck, where the wool naturally curled over it like a protective cloak. Some shepherds went further, crafting leather collars with hidden compartments, innocuous straps that buckled around a sheep's throat, their hollow interiors just wide enough to hold a slip of parchment. Others used the animals themselves as signals, dyeing patches of wool with plant-based pigments that faded within days, marking certain sheep as message carriers for allies watching from a distance. What made this disguise so effective was its sheer mundanity. Sheep were everywhere in medieval Europe, grazing on monastery lands, trailing behind armies for wool and meat, dotting the countryside in endless, bleating waves. A shepherd leading his flock through a border crossing was as unremarkable as the sunrise. Guards might count the sheep to levy a toll, but who would think to search each one? And even if they did, the chaos of a nervous flock scattering under inspection made thorough checks nearly impossible. A well-trained sheepdog could turn a routine search into a comedy of buying confusion, giving the courier precious seconds to retrieve or destroy any hidden materials. The brilliance of this system lay in its patience. Unlike merchants or minstrels who needed to move quickly, shepherds operated on nature's timetable. A message hidden in a fleece might take weeks to reach its destination, but that slow pace meant it avoided the scrutiny faster couriers attracted. Some operatives even trained their flocks to respond to subtle cues, a particular whistle that sent the sheep clustering tightly around the messenger, shielding him from prying eyes while he adjusted a collar or retrieved a note. But perhaps the most daring tactic was the flock's sheer size. A single shepherd could control hundreds of animals, their numbers making it easy to slip in a few extra. These shadow sheep wore no brands or markings, allowing them to blend seamlessly into the herd. If stopped, the courier could claim they were strays picked up along the road, a plausible excuse that also explained why those particular animals might bear unusual collars or trimmed patches of wool. By the time anyone thought to question further, the flock would have moved on, leaving nothing behind but trampled grass and the faint, lingering scent of lanolin. The legacy of these wool-clad spies endures in the landscape itself. Those rolling green hills dotted with sheep, they weren't just pastoral scenery, they were the original dead drops, their bleating inhabitants carrying secrets as effortlessly as they carried their own fleece. In a world obsessed with speed, the shepherds proved that sometimes the surest way to deliver a message was to let it graze its way there. Astrologers didn't just read the stars, they wrote in them. To the untrained eye, their elaborate celestial charts were nothing more than mystical predictions, scribbled with cryptic symbols and looping arcs. But hidden within those swirling diagrams of planets and constellations lay a language far more earthly, coordinates for troop movements, dates of secret meetings, even the names of traitors marked as faint dots beside Mars or Saturn. A courier posing as an astrologer carried more than just parchment and ink, they wielded the night sky itself as their cipher. The brilliance of this disguise lay in its sacred ambiguity. Astrology was both science and superstition in the medieval world, revered by peasants and kings alike. A court astrologer could linger for hours in a monarch's chambers, discussing the omens of Jupiter's alignment, while subtly noting the placement of guards or the layout of fortifications reflected in his star charts. Some operatives crafted volvels, those intricate rotating paper discs used to calculate planetary positions, with hidden layers that slid apart to reveal maps or messages. Others encoded intelligence in the very margins of their predictions, where a seemingly random cluster of stars might mirror the arrangement of castles along a border. Timing was their greatest weapon. Astrologers were routinely consulted before battles, marriages, or treaties, their pronouncements treated as divine guidance. A courier could slip a warning into a prophecy about upcoming eclipses, knowing the superstitious would heed it without question. One account from the court of Burgundy describes an astrologer who delivered news of an ambush by inking it into the tail of a comet's illustration, its trajectory matching the enemy's march. Another, working for the Byzantines, used the ancient Ptolemaic system to encode supply routes, assigning each warehouse a zodiac sign and each road a planetary orbit. But perhaps their most daring trick was the art of the mistaken prediction. An astrologer might deliberately botch a horoscope, claiming Mercury's retrograde had clouded his calculations, only to correct himself days later with a revised chart that contained the real message. Others exploited the ritual burning of unfavorable prophecies, handing a nobleman a doom-laden scroll to be tossed into the flames. while the unburned corner that escaped the fire held the actual intelligence disguised as ash stains. What set these stargazing spies apart was their understanding of human nature. In a world where kings trembled at eclipses and wars were delayed over unlucky alignments, they recognized that the heavens were the ultimate blank canvas. A well-placed omen could sway armies faster than any courier's dispatch. And when history hung in the balance, sometimes the most powerful messages weren't written in ink or hidden in locks. They were drawn in starlight, waiting for the right eyes to decode them. Grave diggers moved through the medieval world like shadows at dusk, their presence tolerated but ignored, their work too grim for most to contemplate. Yet in that very revulsion lay their power. A man shoveling dirt in a churchyard was as invisible as the corpses he buried, his stained hands and mud-caked boots deterring even the most suspicious guards. What better disguise for a courier than one wrapped in the scent of freshly turned earth and the unspoken dread of mortality? Their tools became instruments of deception. A shovel's wooden handle could be hollowed out, its end cap twisting off to reveal a compartment for tightly rolled messages. Coffins themselves offered perfect hiding places, false bottoms concealed beneath thin layers of sawdust, or compartments carved into the sides where a body's shroud might brush against them unnoticed. Some operatives went further, staging burials with empty caskets, the freshly dug graves serving as dead drops where allies could retrieve documents weeks later under cover of night. The genius of this disguise was its exploitation of ritual. Funeral processions were sacred, their sanctity shielding participants from scrutiny. A grave digger leading mourners to a burial plot could whisper updates to contacts amid the weeping, or slip a note into the hand of a grieving accomplice as they helped lower the coffin. Even the act of digging held potential certain patterns of disturbed earth, like a grave dug slightly off-center or a mound left unusually high, could signal safe houses or danger to those who knew the code. But perhaps the most chilling tactic involved the bodies themselves. A courier posing as a corpse might lie motionless in a winding sheet while being transported through enemy territory, the real message sewn into the fabric of their shroud. Others exploited the medieval practice of turning corpses, repositioning bodies in crowded crypts to make room for new arrivals, to hide messages in the vacated niches. One account from the Black Death describes a grave digger who smuggled a besieged town's plea for help by scratching it onto a bone buried among plague victims, knowing the mass grave would escape inspection. What set these operatives apart was their intimate dance with darkness. While others flinched from death's presence, they wielded it as a cloak, wrapping their secrets in society's collective shudder. Their legacy lingers in the quiet corners of old cemeteries, where the earth holds more than just bones. It cradles the echoes of history's most fearless messengers, who understood that sometimes the best way to hide is to stand knee-deep in the grave. These 23 disguises are more than just clever tricks. They're a testament to the sheer brilliance of ordinary people, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Each method, from the baker's hollowed-out loaves to the astrologer's star-charted codes, reveals a world where survival depended on creativity and nerve. What's remarkable isn't just the variety of these ruses, but how they reflect the societies that birthed them. A nun's wimple or a falconer's glove didn't just hide messages. They weaponized the unspoken rules of an era, turning everyday objects into tools of subterfuge. Think about the risks these couriers faced. A single misstep, a guard's curiosity, a poorly timed cough, a loose stitch in a hidden compartment could mean torture, execution, or war. Yet they persevered, not for glory, but because the fragile threads of diplomacy and power depended on their success. The treaties that ended wars, the alliances that toppled tyrants, even the rebellions that reshaped nations. Many of these pivoted on the quiet work of someone disguised as a shepherd, a mason, or a beggar. What's equally fascinating is how these tactics evolved. A trick that worked in the bustling markets of Florence might fail in the frostbitten keeps of Scandinavia, forcing couriers to adapt. The herbalist's poison codes and the dyer's fabric ciphers weren't static. They were living systems refined through trial and error. This wasn't just espionage, it was a high-stakes art form where innovation meant the difference between life and death. And let's not forget the human element. Behind every hollowed-out rosary bead or stitched-in map was a person who chose courage over caution. These weren't faceless agents. They were mothers, apprentices, monks, and merchants who risked everything for causes larger than themselves. Their stories remind us that history isn't just shaped by kings and battles, but by the unsung figures who moved through the margins, carrying the weight of empires in their sleeves, their bread, their very bones. So which disguise stunned you the most? Was it the grave digger who turned superstition into a shield, or the jeweler who hid wars in the prongs of a crown? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear which tale of medieval cunning left you marveling. And if you're hungry for more hidden histories like this, hit that subscribe button. The past is a vault of untold stories, and we've only just begun to pick the lock. Stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, sometimes the most extraordinary secrets are hiding in the most ordinary places.